Ethan stood at the edge of the camp, the sound of steel ringing in the distance. Smoke rose from the hills where battles had been fought, and the ground beneath his boots was black with ash. He had been chosen as a judge, not a fighter. His task was to watch the wars of men and decide if they were just or cruel. But as he looked around, he felt he was stepping into something far greater than he understood. Claire walked beside him, carrying a leather book. She was a historian, her eyes always sharp and searching. She told him that these wars were not like the ones he had read in records. She warned him that he would see things that could never be forgotten. Ethan tried to appear calm, but his hands shook as he adjusted his coat. Daniel, a soldier sent to guard them, moved with steady steps. He had scars on his arms and a stare that never wavered. When Ethan asked him if the wars were as bad as people claimed, Daniel only said, "Worse. But you must see them with your own eyes." That silence that followed was heavier than any words. Their path led them to a ridge overlooking the valley. In the distance, two armies stood ready. Shields gleamed, banners whipped in the cold wind, and the sound of drums rolled across the land. Ethan's heart beat fast as he realized he was about to witness the beginning of a great clash. It was no story, no tale written by others. This was real, and it was happening before him. Then he saw her. Queen Margaret rode at the front of her soldiers. Her armor was marked with scratches, proof that she had fought many times before. She did not stay behind the lines like other rulers. She rode forward, raising her sword high, and her men roared with one voice. Ethan felt the air tremble with their cry. It was not just the shout of men ready for battle. It was the sound of loyalty, a fire that burned too strong to be put out. Claire whispered that this was why judging humanity was impossible. Their wars were not only about land or power, they were about survival, pride, and something deeper that could not be measured. Ethan could not look away. Every soldier's face was set with the same grim fire, and he realized that no order, no force, could ever fully stop men like this. As the armies moved closer, Ethan felt fear rise in his chest. He had been told to judge, but how could anyone judge this? He now understood that he was not only a witness, he was standing at the edge of something that might one day consume everything. The morning air was sharp with cold when Ethan, Claire, and Daniel followed the march of the Queen's army. The ground shook beneath the heavy steps of men and horses. Banners snapped in the wind and the drums beat like a heartbeat that pulled everyone forward. Ethan felt as if he was being carried into the mouth of a storm. They came at last to the great field where two armies faced each other. Lines of steel stretched as far as Ethan could see. Enemy banners waved on the opposite side, their soldiers silent and still. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Never had he seen so many men waiting for one command to decide life and death. Queen Margaret rode before her soldiers. Her black horse pawed at the earth as she raised her sword. Silence spread across the field. Then she spoke with a voice that carried to the farthest ranks. She told her men that they stood for freedom, that chains would never bind them, that their courage would mark the dawn of a new age. She promised no safety and no rest, only that their fight would mean something greater than themselves. The men answered with a roar so fierce that even the birds fled from the trees. Ethan felt the sound shake his bones. Claire gripped her journal tightly, her hand shaking as she tried to keep up with the Queen's words. Daniel only stared at the Queen with hard eyes, nodding slowly, as if each word confirmed what he had always believed. When the Queen finished, she did not retreat to safety. She turned her horse and rode to the very front of the line. The soldiers followed her lead, lowering their spears, tightening their shields. She raised her sword and gave the signal. The drums thundered again, and the field erupted with motion. The clash was like thunder rolling across the earth. Steel struck steel, shields cracked, and cries filled the air. Ethan stood on a rise where he could see the chaos unfold. Men fought with every ounce of strength, refusing to fall even when blood poured from their wounds. The Queen was in the center, her blade cutting through the press of enemies, her horse never faltering. Ethan could hardly believe what his eyes saw. She fought as if she had no fear of death. Her men followed with the same fire. They moved as one, each soldier covering the other, each strike made with purpose. No one broke rank even when the pressure grew. Instead, they fought harder, as if pain itself gave them power. Claire whispered that no other people had ever fought like this. She said most armies break when the line begins to fall. but these men seemed to rise when struck. Daniel spoke low, saying this was why their enemies feared them. Once a human army tasted blood, they became something no wall or chain could stop. Hours passed. The ground was slick with mud and blood, yet the Queen's banner still stood tall. Ethan's heart pounded. He was meant to be an observer, yet every shout, every strike, every cry of defiance pulled him deeper into the storm. At last, the enemy began to falter. Their line wavered, men throwing down shields and fleeing. The Queen pressed harder, refusing to let them breathe. Her voice rose above the clash, urging her warriors forward. They answered, driving the enemy from the field. When silence finally fell, Ethan looked across the plain. It was covered with broken bodies, both friend and foe. The Queen lowered her sword but did not smile. She spoke to her captains with the same calm strength as before. Victory was theirs, but she reminded them that more battles waited. Ethan wrote in his book with shaking hands. He did not know what judgment he could give. He had seen war before in stories and reports, but this was something far beyond. He had seen a queen who fought as one of her men, in an army that grew stronger the longer the fight lasted. As night fell, Ethan felt a weight settle on his chest. If this was only the beginning, then the truth of humanity's wars would be more than he had ever feared. The morning after the battle was heavy with smoke and silence. The plain was covered with the fallen, and the smell of iron filled the air. Ethan walked among the men as they gathered the wounded and burned the broken carts. His heart felt heavy, but his eyes could not turn away. These were not stories in a book. This was war written on the earth itself. Queen Margaret moved through the camp on foot, speaking to the wounded, giving them her own water, and steadying their hands. No soldier turned his eyes away from her. They watched her with respect that ran deeper than fear. She had fought beside them, and that bond was stronger than any crown. Ethan was struck by the way her presence lifted even the weakest man from despair. Daniel cleaned his sword at the edge of the camp, silent and focused. When Ethan asked him how he could stand so calm after such blood, Daniel answered with only a few words. He said that this was not the worst battle he had seen, and that humans only grew harder with each trial. Ethan wanted to question him further, but the look in Daniel's eyes warned him to stay silent. Claire filled page after page in her journal, recording every order, every chant, every cry from the soldiers. She whispered that no ruler of history had led like this queen. She said leaders usually hid behind walls while others bled, but Margaret had turned herself into the shield of her people. Ethan wondered if such a queen could ever be defeated at all. As the sun climbed, riders arrived with news. Another army was gathering, stronger than the first, and it would strike within days. The camp did not break into panic. Instead, the soldiers tightened their belts, sharpened their blades, and sang war songs that shook the sky. Ethan shivered as he listened. These men were tired and bleeding, yet they prepared as if they had been given fresh strength. That night, the Queen called her captains and watchers. Ethan was invited to stand among them. A map lay open on the table, marked with rivers and hills. Margaret pointed with her sword, her voice steady as she spoke of traps and counterstrikes. She asked her captains for counsel, but always made the final choice herself. Every man obeyed her word without question. Ethan realized it was not only fear of her blade that held their loyalty. It was the certainty that she would never ask them to walk where she would not go herself. After the meeting, Margaret approached Ethan. Her eyes studied him, sharp and unyielding. She asked if he had seen enough to make his judgment. Ethan stammered that his task was not yet complete. She gave a faint nod and told him that truth could not be written from the edge of the field. He must stand closer if he wished to understand. The next day, Ethan found himself drawn into the heart of the army. He walked among the soldiers as they trained, striking wood dummies with such force that splinters flew through the air. He watched them wrestle in the dirt until their arms trembled, yet none would quit until pulled away. They laughed only in short bursts, but their eyes always returned to the horizon, as if waiting for the enemy to appear at any moment. As night fell again, Ethan could not rest. The sound of steel and the cries of the men rang in his head. He wrote in his book that humans did not grow weary of war. They seemed born for it. Their bodies might break, their numbers might fall, but their spirit refused to bend. He remembered the Queen's voice, strong as iron, and felt fear rise within him. If this was how they fought with wounded bodies and weary hearts, what would happen if they marched with all their strength unbroken? Ethan's hands shook as he closed his journal. He dreaded the thought of what he might yet see. The sky was dark with heavy clouds when the horns called the army to rise. The news had spread that the enemy was coming in greater numbers than before. Men tightened their armor and gripped their blades with steady hands. Ethan felt the weight of fear pressing on him, yet the soldiers stood ready as if fear itself could not touch them. Queen Margaret rode before her warriors. She did not hide the truth. She told them the enemy was strong, that many of them would not see the sun set again. But she also told them that their fight would echo for generations, that their names would not be lost to silence. She raised her sword high and promised she would stand in the front, not behind them. The men roared back with voices that carried like thunder. The battle came swiftly. The enemy poured across the field in waves, their numbers stretching beyond sight. The clash shook the ground as steel met steel, and shields splintered. Ethan stood on a ridge with Claire, the sound of war slamming against his chest like a hammer. Queen Margaret charged at the head of her army. Her black horse tore through the mud, her blade flashing with each strike. Men fell before her, and those behind her surged forward with wild cries. Ethan could not believe that a single woman could turn the tide of so many, yet he saw it with his own eyes. Every time her sword rose, her men fought harder, refusing to give ground. Daniel was in the thick of the fight, moving with brutal force. He cut down enemies with skill born of endless battles. He bled from his arm but never slowed. Claire shouted for Ethan to keep writing, but Ethan's hands shook so badly the words blurred on the page. The hours dragged like years. The field became a storm of blood and cries. Still, the humans did not fall back. They pushed forward, step by step, even when their numbers thinned. They fought as if their bones would break before their will. Ethan watched a soldier with a broken shield strike with his bare fists, rather than retreat. Another man pierced through with a spear, held the weapon in place and swung his sword until his last breath. As the sun sank, the enemy began to falter. Their lines wavered under the weight of human fury. Queen Margaret drove her horse straight into their center, her banner whipping above her head. Her men surged with her, cutting through the heart of the enemy until the field broke apart. The enemy fled into the dark, leaving behind their dead and their weapons. The field was theirs, but the cost was written in the bodies of countless men. Queen Margaret stood in the ruin, her armor drenched, her face marked with dust and blood. She raised her sword once more, not in triumph, but in grim command. She told her men that the war was not yet over, that victory today only meant another fight tomorrow. Ethan could not move. He stared at the queen, at the men who shouted her name, even as they fell to their knees from exhaustion. He felt the dread grow heavy inside him. These people did not understand defeat. They did not know how to break. He thought of the council waiting for his judgment and wondered what words could ever hold the truth of what he had seen. That night, the camp was filled with silence. No songs, no laughter. Only the sound of weary men cleaning blades and burying their brothers. Ethan sat near the fire, his journal open before him. His words came slowly. He wrote that he had seen an army that turned pain into strength, a queen who fought like fire, and men who gave their last breath with pride. He wrote that if humanity's wars ever spread beyond these lands, the world would tremble. Ethan closed his book with shaking hands and looked at the dark sky. He dreaded the dawn, for he knew the war was far from finished. The council fire burned in the center of the great hall when Ethan was called to speak. The war had ended for now, the enemy driven back, and Queen Margaret had returned with her men.
Out.
She sat at the long table with her captains, her armor still scarred from the last battle. The room was filled with silence, as all waited for Ethan's words. He had seen the battles, he had walked among the wounded. He had heard the cries of men who chose death before surrender. Now the council wanted his judgment. Was humanity's war a crime, or was it honor? Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. His hand trembled as he held his notes. Before he spoke, his eyes met the Queen's. Her gaze was steady, fierce, unshaken. She gave no plea, no request, only the same iron will he had seen on the battlefield. She did not need his approval. She already knew what she was. Ethan began to speak. His voice was rough, but steady. He told of what he had witnessed. He spoke of men who fought though their bodies were broken, of captains who stood even when death was certain, of a queen who rode into the fire beside her soldiers. He said that their wars were not waged for greed or empty crowns, but for freedom, for survival, for the right to stand unbroken. Yet even as he praised their strength, his words carried a warning. Told the council that humanity's war was like a fire that could never be controlled. He said their pain turned to power, their losses became their fuel, and that no chain could hold them once they rose. He warned that if such strength ever crossed into lands beyond their own, nothing would stop it. The hall was still when he finished. The captains stared at him with grim faces. The queen did not move, but her eyes burned brighter. Claire sat in the shadows, writing every word, while Daniel stood with arms folded, silent but watchful. The council asked Ethan if his judgment was that humanity's wars should be condemned. Ethan shook his head. He said he could not condemn them, for he had seen honor and courage that no words could deny, but he could not call them safe either. He said humanity was both shield and storm, noble yet terrifying. They were not a people who could be contained. His words spread across the hall, heavy as stone. The council dismissed him, leaving his report to be weighed. Ethan stepped back, his chest tight with fear. He had spoken the truth, yet the truth itself felt like a curse. Later that night, Ethan walked through the camp once more. The soldiers were quiet, tending to fires, sharpening blades, preparing for whatever lay ahead. He saw men missing limbs still training with wooden staves, refusing to give up. He saw women mending armor with hands blistered from work, their eyes set with the same fire as the warriors. Queen Margaret passed among them, her presence steady. She did not speak of peace. She told them to be ready, for the war would return. Ethan watched her and felt the same dread rise within him. She was more than a ruler. She was a symbol that would never break. As he wrote his final words that night, Ethan confessed to himself what he could not tell the council. He dreaded the return of humanity's wars, for he had seen their true face. He had seen men who would fight until the world itself broke, and a queen who would lead them without fear. He knew that if the fire of such wars ever spread wider, no power could resist it. Ethan closed his book and stared into the flames. He had been sent to judge, but he left with fear in his heart. The world was not ready for humanity's return to war, and deep down he prayed that day would never come.